Our society is in a constant state of flux. It is not a static, immovable monolith, but rather a fluid, ever-evolving and changing historical and contextual structure that is always being recreated, dying, and being born anew. These changes happen in a myriad of ways. They happen through the market, where goods and services are constantly being bought and sold. They happen through our environment, which is constantly being recreated and repurposed due to the impacts of climate change and human intervention. They happen through technology, where new innovations such as the internet have reconceptualized how and when we communicate with each other. And they also happen through popular cultural trends that can dictate our tastes and our aesthetic preferences. If we study how societies change over time, there's a certain type of change that is different from other types of change, and it is as old as human history itself. These are structural and political changes that contain the potential to not only change the conditions and issues that people face, but can also usher in entire new political, economic, and historical formations that have the potential to rearrange daily life. All major changes and shifts in history have happened this way. They happen through social movements, through people coming together over a common issue and fighting for the change they want to see in the world. Social movements are by their very nature multi-strategic. This means that they implement many different strategies towards creating social change simultaneously, whether they are conscious of it or not. These different strategies and approaches to create change can be harnessed to create large-scale political and societal changes and transformations. Yet, there are constant and inherent tensions between these approaches that can also keep movements stagnant, unable to realize their full potential and revolutionary power. As we study history and how past social movements develop, 5 major ways of creating change emerge. They are personal transformation, alternatives, inside game, structure-based organizing, and mass protest. We call these 5 perspectives the 5 foundational theories of change, since they are, in essence, categories of how people and organizations think about and struggle to create change in the world. In each category, we find organizations, practices, modalities, philosophies, and tools. There is a lot of complexity held within each foundational theory of change, as well as how they relate to complement and contradict one another. But first, in this video, we will seek to understand each of the 5 foundational theories of change in their essence, to understand what we mean by movement ecology. Personal transformation believes that change happens when we better our lives and the lives of others through providing service, improving our health and well-being, or reaching higher levels of consciousness. In this belief, personal transformation organizations and programs are focused on the individual and their transformation. Sometimes this refers to internal work, or personal work, or people changing their values or beliefs, but it can also refer to helping one another. Examples of personal transformation include leadership development programs, spiritual counseling, 12-step recovery programs, diversity and anti-oppression trainings, yoga and mindfulness practices, mental health therapy and counseling, food banks, job placement services, and other social service programs. Personal transformation attends to people's direct needs, and it projects a vision of change rippling slowly outward as individual lives are improved. It believes that if people are supported and helped, their transformation can contribute to a larger social change. Alternatives are cultures, institutions, organizations, or groups that respond to the dominant status quo or the dominant way of doing things by creating something outside of it that can serve the needs of a community. These are institutions that offer a new vision for the future by experimenting with alternative ways of doing and being. Examples of alternatives include worker and consumer cooperatives, credit unions, affinity groups, urban gardens, buy-nothing groups, countercultural music genres, restorative justice programs, alternative medicines such as herbalism and psychedelics, and some alternative education curricula, such as Montessori. Alternatives reject a spectrum of dominant values in our society that oppress people, values of domination, of punitivism, and of capitalist extractivism. They seek to build groups, cultures, institutions that embody the world we want to live in, and embody a different set of values based on equality, justice, and freedom. Leaders in this theory believe that in order to change the world, we have to first build the kind of world we want to see. In this theory, it is impossible to create change in the world if we are not creating something new, something liberatory, something better than what is currently offered by the status quo. By proving the success of new and innovative arrangements, some alternatives have the potential to create prototypes that can be replicated and expanded on a broader scale. As opposed to personal transformation and alternatives, the next three foundational theories of change all believe in changing society through engaging and shifting the dominant institutions in one way or another. Dominant institutions are institutions that hold power and support and maintain the status quo, or how things are. Examples include the government, political parties, the mainstream media, large corporations, the judiciary system, and more. The inside game is concerned with negotiating and working within the established rules of dominant institutions to reform or change them from the inside. This theory of change includes any strategy working within insider channels to influence decision-making. In this theory of change, change-makers leverage their access to powerful decision-makers and use expert knowledge to lobby for reforms. Examples of the inside game include working with legislators to craft better policy or negotiating with corporate leadership, using legal actions to change or challenge laws, a principal seeking to change school policies, running for public office, covering stories often ignored by the mainstream media as a reporter, or working to change your local church or religious institution from the inside. Inside game players may be vying for seats of power themselves, or they may be working closely with people already in power in order to influence decisions. Their focus is on using the established channels of change, such as elections, the legal system, and the current bureaucracy, rather than external pressure or changing the channels themselves. Also known as community or labor organizing, structure-based organizing believes in building bases of leaders and organizations to pressure power holders in dominant institutions to create change. These bases of leaders could be any constituency, including people living in a certain neighborhood or city, workers in certain industries, young people, people of faith, women, or any racial, ethnic, or other demographic group. It could also be self-identified groups of people who care passionately about a given issue, such as animal rights or healthcare. The most prominent examples of structure-based organizing groups are labor unions, community-based organizations, and neighborhood organizations, civic engagement groups, worker centers, and faith-based organizations. Structure organizing groups have a number of common traits and methodologies. They build power and resources through a long-term organization, they develop leadership through one-on-one relationships and committee building, and they believe that campaigns are won by exerting leverage on primary and secondary targets. Last but certainly not least, mass protest is focused on changing the weather, or creating large protests that can shift public opinion around a certain issue. Mass protest efforts build power by using a series of repeated, escalating actions and scenarios to create political crises that gradually polarize a majority of the population to support reform, such as passing an act in Congress, or revolution, such as overthrowing a dictatorship. Mass protest prioritizes action that is symbolic and expressive to build the movement's profile with the public at large. A mass protest movement can consist of multiple organizations, sometimes working on multiple interrelated issues. Because mass protest acts as a catalyst, it can engage both inside players and structure groups. But typically, mass protest will also produce new groups and new formations of people that sprout up outside of established institutions. These include groups that formed around protests, actions, civil disobedience, or acts of defiance. Due to the volatility of protest activity, it's hard to recognize single organizations that work in mass protests. But it's easier to understand it in movement moments that are able to catapult an issue into public consciousness. Some of those moments include the March on Washington, Freedom Rides, Selma Bloody Sunday, Stonewall riots, Seattle World Trade Organization protests, the Iraq War protests, the 2006 Mega March Stay Without an Immigrant, Occupy Wall Street, Dakota Access Pipeline protests, the Women's March on Washington, Black Lives Matter, and most recently, the 2024 pro-Palestinian protests on university campuses. Although we oftentimes refer to the foundational theories of change at the scale of institutions or organizations, we can also see it lived out in the actions and choices of a person. For example, in the actions of a teacher. Teachers often navigate incredibly difficult circumstances in order to make a difference. They operate in underfunded and under-resourced schools, huge classroom sizes, and dysfunctional school administrations. They go through incredible lengths and sacrifices, including taking money out of their pockets to buy books, school supplies, and sometimes food and groceries for their students, because they believe that if they can make a positive impact in the lives of just a couple of their students, then their sacrifice is worth it. This is the power of personal transformation. As a child's life is impacted by the actions of the teacher, you change their lives, their families' lives, the whole community around them. But this is not the only way the teacher can address the issue of underfunded and under-resourced schools. They could also work with a team or group of people to create an alternative school, a school that uses different curricula than other schools, or has particular values and practices such as a focus on mindfulness practices, real history, political engagement, or that teach students practical skills. Or they could become a school board member and try to make change from the inside in the school policy. They could also try to rise from within the ranks to ultimately become principal and have the biggest leadership role in the school. But what if that teacher doesn't want to become an elected official? They could instead create or join a teachers' union. They would become a member and actively support by talking to and meeting with other teachers to collectively decide on what particular issue to push on. Then they would put pressure on the principal, school board members, or superintendent to push them to enact the necessary changes at their school. Or they could dedicate their time to doing big demonstrations and actions to garner support for their cause. They could organize a walkout at their school or school district, joining together with thousands of teachers, parents, and students. Maybe it's to call for more funding for their school, higher wages, or to address inequalities between schools in their district. They would contact traditional media like news outlets and post videos of their marches on social media. We can see that even though there is one common issue or problem they are trying to solve, there are many different ways that one can approach creating change through the 5 foundational theories of change. The 5 foundational theories of change help us understand the different ways that individuals, organizations, and groups try to make change in this world. These 5 categories are the entry points and sources of craft for many people in social change. Some join movements through participation in mass protest demonstrations. Others grow tired of employment exploitation and join the ranks of the labor movement as organizers, while others find their starting point in alternative countercultures where they find belonging and safety. Embodying and learning each theory requires a temporary negation of the others. For example, the only way to learn community organizing is to recognize the limits of the inside game, or to build alternatives is to recognize the limits of engaging dominant institutions. Because of this negation, movements often face tensions, dogmatism, and conflicts between theories. Some claim their theory is the best, capable of achieving everything, the Holy Grail. These tensions can prevent movements from succeeding because movement power requires the use of all strategies. Movements need the power of personal transformation to develop new leaders and create space for people to grieve social stigmas and gain emotional power. They also require alternatives to create safe spaces and radical tools that can be scaled in the future. Once there is enough leadership, movements can bolster base-building organizations with large memberships that engage in mass protests to build power and popularity, which can then be leveraged for inside-game interventions, policy victories, implementation, and defending those victories. It is our hope that by recognizing the value and inherent worth of every foundational theory of change, as well as the inherent tensions and contradictions that exist between them, social change leaders can be better equipped to create strategy, collaborate with others, have clear roles that can harness the power of what we call movement ecology, which happens when all 5 foundational theories of change are working together to achieve a particular purpose. The frontier of movement building to win on the issues our world so desperately needs rests on our ability to collaborate with and magnify these 5 approaches.